Hello, and welcome back to AI Ramblings with Neal Makwana and myself, Michael Parekh, episode 19. Neil, Labor Day weekend has come and gone. It's still holiday for a lot of people. You just came back from a
Yeah.
wonderful trip east.
Yeah, I had a great time. I was in Greenwich visiting a couple of friends in Connecticut I'd never been before, and then we went to the U.S. Open as well. We spent a lot of our time in Connecticut. That was new for me. Greenwich was great. We actually had a little celebrity run-in. We were getting coffee morning of the U.S. Open actually before we headed into Flushing, and we ran into, of all people, Hassan Minhaj, who obviously we're both pretty
I
big
love
fans
him.
of. Yeah, it was great. He was with his family. Actually, the reason we realized it was him was because his kids had knocked over a bunch of bikes while they were trying to ride their bikes, and it caused a bit of a commotion. So I could already see his wheels churning on, a potential bit for a show.
How
But
old are
it
his
was good.
kids?
They
How old
they
are
were
his
young.
kids?
They were maybe 5, 6.
Oh,
It
they're
was one of the things where
babies.
yeah. He was with his family, so we didn't want to. We already felt a bit intrusive talking to him, but we were like, we couldn't pass up the opportunity. So it was
And
great.
you
It
got
was
a
short and sweet.
selfie.
We
You
did.
got a
We got
selfie.
we got a
We'll
picture with him,
we'll put it up in the
and
show notes. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
it's cute.
But no, it was great.
He looked at camera ready, and so did you. All
Yeah,
this
he was very
AI
nice. Yeah,
rambling. You're a star.
yeah, I know.
No,
Yeah,
Hassan, we love Hassan. One of my favorite, he does a wonderful podcast, which everyone should watch when they can. But he did a recent one with Trevor Noah, who's my other major all-time favorite comedian, and we'll put up the link as well. But it's amazing the sensibility these people bring to the world and so on. So anyway, that's awesome.
yeah.
I did not have any fun trips, but enjoyed Houston in the heat and rain, and got ready for a lot of things that are going on. We've been telling you that post Labor Day, it's going to be a tsunami of news. And even this week, in the middle of Labor Day weekend and week is not an exception. We've got a lot of things that happen, but we want to just break it up into our usual news of the week, major topics, and then our favorite topics like our favorite
Yeah.
watches and and reads and obsessions and so on. But in terms of news, the things we want to focus on, the big one obviously was Google got a green light from the antitrust courts. There was a lot of speculation that they may have to divest their Chrome browser. You had OpenAI salivating at potentially having a chance to buy it. Perplexity put in a bid of $34 billion above its $14 billion valuation as a PR move. We talked about it in previous shows. And the judge said, you can keep Chrome, but you got to share some of the data with the competitors, and of course Google doesn't like that, so they'll fight that. The other thing they said is you can keep your search deal, where they're paying $20 billion plus to Apple to make Google the default on Apple desktops, Apple iPhones, etc. And they can continue with that. And that gives a green light to Apple. And there was news after the announcement that they are testing Gemini to include in their version of Siri instead of ChatGPT, where they do have a partnership as well. And so there was news that Apple will have their Siri launch next year, not this year, which they've hinted it's not this year, and it likely will have Gemini now, and Google will probably pay for the privilege. It was interesting. There was other scuttlebutt just in the weeds for people who like this. Apple was also looking at Anthropic as a potential partner, and Anthropic wanted $1.5 billion. They wanted money the other way, and Apple basically said, "Hey, we'll with this decision now, we can just have Google keep paying us." And $20 billion. I mean, the services revenue line at Apple, just for people who want to track this stuff, it's a $4 trillion company. Services line is now the second largest business at Apple after the iPhone. So it's not even the Mac. It's not these AirPods and so on. It's a big number. And so these are high margin revenue streams and so on. The green light, lot of in the weeds discussion around the legal case. What does it mean? A number of people didn't like it, but we wrote about it. There's a lot of detail on it. But it's a big win on the Remedies side, big news item of the week. Second one, and I'll just highlight these and then we can come back and discuss them.
Yeah.
The second one is, this was a breaking news. It just happened this morning. We've been talking about the browser company with the Dia browser for months now on the show. Perplexity with Comet is the other AI browser company. And in this fall, we're going to see OpenAI come out with their own some browser strategy. Anthropic just announced extensions that you can use in Chrome to use Claude, etc. and Apple's going to be doing similar things, potentially with Gemini. But Atlassian, which is an enterprise software company, about $55 billion market cap, about 5-ish billion in revenue, generating $1.5 billion in cash flow. Why is all that important? Well, they're paying $610 million for the browser company, which made the Arc browser, which you were a big fan of for years, and the Dia browser, which you've been testing. And it's a nice little bump up for investors, current investors. It's a private company from the last valuation of 550. I'm getting into these financial metrics because the browser company, and they had a very nice memo, which people interested, they should read. Josh Miller is the founder. He's very visible online, YouTube, etc. And he said, look, this is an opportunity for us to get big resources from a bigger company, distribution. Atlassian, for people who are not familiar, is a big enterprise software company. They make very robust tools and communication protocols for developers and increasingly now office workers and so on. So they're very much in the enterprise space, growing very nicely. And the browser, what this does is basically, and we've talked about AI browsers, it allows not Perplexity, sorry, I misspoke, browser company to focus on the enterprise market with the AI browser with Atlassian's resources. And they get to stay as an independent company. They get to keep all their employees. They get a ton of resources. They, presumably get integration into Atlassian's products, Jira, etc., which any startup has ever, used. I remember we used it at the startup, I had a few years ago, and you were helping in those days. And so it's a good route. And the one other thing I'll just mention, because Perplexity is the other one with the Comet browser, and it's interesting. Perplexity is before they focused in on the AI browser, that people have been talking about them as the AI search company. And it's interesting. There's another company called Glean, which is a private company. I wrote about it. It's also worth billions of dollars. Glean focuses on enterprise search, and they've made a very big business. So AI search, which is the big category for OpenAI in search, and now the browser, which will be coming. Search and AI browsers are breaking up into consumer and enterprise. Glean on the enterprise side, Perplexity on the consumer AI search side, and now the browser company with Atlassian's help will be the enterprise AI browser company. They're not positioning it that way. It's my positioning of them, and that gives them some access to the consumer browser lane, but that's a much bigger lane because they have to go head up against Google Chrome and Safari and so on, and that's tough. Billions of people, won't change their habits overnight. But it's a good logical step where they can continue to improve their product. So it's a very big deal for nerds like us who watch this stuff in detail. It won't make that many headlines. It does also, by the way, take Perplexity potentially a little bit off the table for Apple to buy. There was an Apple build versus buy speculation of Perplexity. And what's interesting to me, and this is me saying this, that no news, just watching this stuff, that Perplexity now potentially has an opportunity to partner, or maybe even be acquired by Microsoft. Why? Because Microsoft, who has been partnering with OpenAI, is also rethinking its relationship with OpenAI, because those companies are now competing more, and Microsoft is supporting a lot more models. Perplexity also supports a lot of models. And Perplexity with Comet, it can potentially help Microsoft really supercharge its Edge browser strategy, which it is the third most used browser. It's less than a single-digit percentage market share. That this acquisition by Atlassian potentially makes a Microsoft Perplexity thing interesting. So I just wanted to throw that out there. New things. A lot of we don't report the news here. We talk about the news and figure out what these implications are. So this was my little reaction to this morning's news. Third news item we want to talk about is OpenAI. They had hired a new CEO of applications, this former CEO of Instacart, and she just announced some major reorg things at OpenAI, and we did a piece on it, and there's a lot of discussion on it. So, but that's an interesting thing that came out this week, in this quiet week, etc. And then the last thing, news of the week, come Monday, Apple's going to announce their iPhone 17 and their full launch of stuff. Google just announced their Pixel phones last week. Samsung has already announced their phones, etc. So AI gadgets, it's going to be another thing in the fall, and that's going to be that's a fourth news item of the week that I wanted to highlight. So there's a lot of stuff, and a lot of things that you and I have been talking about a lot. So
I mean,
wanted to throw it out there.
No, I think it's moving fast as we've expected. Come summertime, it's new season as we've discussed. But kind of starting off with the Google news, I mean, I think overall this is a huge decision just for incumbents and startups from that option, just because it provides a lot more options in competition for AI and obviously in search markets, which are in high demand. Right? I think it's great for people like us, the consumers, because it means we have more options and kind of ways to use these cool things. I think because of that, we'll continue to hopefully get more innovation in this area while also kind of maintaining this regulatory precedent that's now been set. Touching a bit on the Atlassian browser company thing, I think it's a really interesting move just because of the tools that Atlassian has right now. But the more I kind of think about it and to take a step back, I think there's a lot of cool integration opportunities with things like Confluence and whatnot and Jira, where these are these tools that I've had to use in the past for internships. I have friends that use them in big tech right now, whether they're doing Sprint or Scrum methodologies to work internally. And I think a way where you can kind of connect a browser to that to provide AI capabilities with search and whatnot, and kind of getting parsing over documents and images and even videos, I think would be a really cool feature set that maybe isn't being pushed right now. And obviously, the browser company has been known, at least for me, for the company that's doing it the best design wise, maybe not functionality wise. And hopefully, some of the functionality and kind of power that they were lacking now can come into play with this type of partnership. So I think it's great for them, and hopefully, I know people that used Arc were already very skeptical when Dia was announced, and I'm sure that skepticism is going to go up even more with this Atlassian acquisition. Essentially, I think these things are needed, hopefully, for the company to progress, and we'll have to see how it impacts users.
I think you put your finger on a very key point, which is that this is a set of tools, Atlassian, that helps in the workflow for millions, if not tens of millions of developers. And there's been a lot of focus on enterprise applications, productivity applications, Salesforce, agents, all of that, but not as much on the workflow side. And so you're totally right that this starts to put browsers that are AI powered into that mix and change the workflow aspect for developers. And why is that also important? Because AI coding has been the white hot category. That's another thing we've talked about through the last 18, 19 episodes. And this is AI coding workflow implementation as
Yeah.
opposed to AI coding applications. A lot of focus on how much of your code is AI writing, 30, 40%, et cetera. That's good. But code doesn't get written by solitary developers. It's a workflow project, team oriented thing. And so this is a definitional element, an opportunity for browser company and Atlassian to establish AI coding workflows that are with these tools, and recognize that Atlassian also bought another company called Loom, which most people don't remember. It's video connectivity. So think about it as an enterprise Zoom. And that, again, is part of this parcel. Now, acquisitions are funny. Most acquisitions don't live up to their initial expectations. There's a lot of work, hard work, cultural fits, all that. So this company will have to figure that out within Atlassian. A lot of questions. But on the surface, as an analyst watching this, as you, Neil, who's used these products, etc., yeah, we can get excited about it. We can get behind this conceptually. But Josh, team, congratulations. 5 years of hard work, but the work's just beginning. And you guys with Atlassian, celebrate tonight, roll up your sleeves and get to it. It's a lot of work ahead.
Yeah. No, exactly. Trying to think what else was kind of on my mind as you were going through all that. I mean, yeah, obviously with OpenAI as CEO of applications, I mean, this is kind of where everyone is looking next. And there was an information article that we've discussed a while ago, report that OpenAI is venturing into productivity apps, which is obviously adjacent to what we're talking about here with Atlassian and what Google has been doing, trying to add Gemini into things like Drive, Docs, and Sheets and slides as well. And I think AI apps are an interesting space just because a lot of people are just trying to bolt on. This is one of the first things we talked about and that I wrote about in my Substack was right now the interfaces are kind of shifting in a way, hopefully away from where we're just bolting chatbots onto the side of existing experiences and maybe adding more inline functionality that just kind of helps the user without also just being an eyesore from a UI UX perspective, where you're not having to disrupt your flow of what you're doing to take a pause. And I think OpenAI has the team to hopefully do this and do it well. So CEO of applications. That's obviously right up her job and kind of what she's going to be doing in the day to day. So hopefully that pans out well. And yeah, obviously we're going to have a lot of news to report next week with Apple's announcements, new iPhones, obviously setting a date for the new operating systems to finally launch and get into our hands.
Which takes us right into the topic of the day, which
Yeah.
is Apple's showcase. So why don't you continue? What are you
Yeah.
excited about in terms of what
Yeah.
Apple's reporting on Monday?
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot. I think I know we've talked about this, I've talked about this with friends, is that I feel like Apple keynotes in the last few years, for whatever reason, haven't felt as they used to in the past, whether that's nostalgia or just the speed at which things are innovating. But I think this year is going to be hopefully a step back towards the direction that we were used to in the past. They're obviously rumored to be launching this obviously new phones and whatnot, a light version of the iPhone, which will be a potential redesign from what they've done in the past. There's rumors. I don't think we're going to hear about it here, but there are rumors of that Pixar lamp that we discussed last week from a Bloomberg report, with Apple venturing into home accessories a little further from what they've done with AirPods in the past. I mean, sorry, not AirPods, the HomePod in the past. I don't think we're going to hear about that, but it'll be, I'm sure they'll lay the foundation for what that kind of looks like. And the thing I'm the most excited about, obviously, is to get all the new operating systems in hand. I think people have kind of forgotten, this is the issue
26.
with the whole yearly release thing, is that, from the time they're announced to the time it ships, so a lot of people kind of forget about it with how fast news is moving. But I think Apple's going to do some really cool things with not only the UI changes with liquid glass, but also a lot of the functionality that we've been hoping that gets shipped, and the simplification of apps that we use every day. So that's something hopefully we'll be able to discuss in the coming weeks.
OS 26 and everything 26.
Exactly.
No longer, it's all now matched to the year. So yeah,
Yeah.
very exciting. The one other thing I will just say, now that we've had at a high level devices announced by Samsung, which is a big Android company, and then everything that's going on in China from the Xiaomi's and the Huawei's, etc., and then everything that's Pixel that Google announced with Pixel. The highlight I would say at a super high level is that if you look at some of my posts earlier this year, I said, look, this is the year that we will start to see the beginning of an upgrade cycle for local devices, computers, smartphones, etc., that are more optimized for AI, more neural processors, GPUs, etc. And that is what we're seeing through all this. We'll see this with Apple's announcement is Monday. They'll talk a lot about, they won't talk about AI per se, but they'll talk about the silicon chip that's in the various products that can do machine learning calculations. And all of that is great. It's a beginning of a multi-year cycle. The street has been focused on it. It's important. These devices now have mode-based memory, 16 gigabytes typically, which is a good thing. Already the new Pixels, they're already reserving 3 out of the 16 gigabytes for AI functionality, whether the AI apps are ready or not. And all of this is important from a geeky bottom-up perspective, that these things require a lot more RAM, a lot more memory to do the neural processing. But the flip is, this has also been a weird year with geopolitics, trade curbs, tariffs. We've written a lot about it. And that is headwind. That is slowing down the hardware cycle, especially with the tussles with China. We don't want stuff made there. We want the stuff made here. It's almost impossible to make the stuff here. So the companies are having to really rethink their. So all of that, basically, as exciting as these hardware products are and the software around it, the one thing that broader observers should be keeping in mind is that the broader geopolitical environment is slowing things down. If we didn't have it, all of these products that are going to be announced on Monday from Apple and the ones that have been announced would probably have been anywhere from $100, $200 cheaper, 5, 10, 15%. These companies are eating the margin hit of some of these tariffs, and some of these have been exempted. So there's a lot of, but it's so complicated. And
Yeah.
and so the tariff impact is one I just want to highlight as we look at this as gadgets and stuff as gadgets fan. And that is a very important piece to keep in mind as the main topic as we start September and finish out this year. And everyone is going to be really focused. I mean, the real hardware cycle is really going to be next year. Hopefully by that time, some of this tariff stuff will be resolved one way or the other. There's a lot of stuff going on through the courts, and it'll go up to the Supreme Court. We'll see how it all shakes out.
Yeah.
So just another item to kind of touch on that, there's a lot to discuss here, but we'll leave it there. We'll have a lot more discussion in some of the show notes, the links and so on. And that takes us to our watch and read of the week. Why don't you kick us off there? What are
Yeah,
you
mine
excited about?
is and something that we've discussed a couple times on the show recently. It's a Wall Street Journal article. China has a different vision for AI, and it might be smarter. And it's touching on a lot of the things that we've discussed in the past. Mostly where, as we all know, the U.S. is spending billions toward this race for AGI. This big lofty goal that hopefully will be seeing it come to fruition in the next few years, and with the promise of completely transforming the way we're already using these technologies. But it's showing this flip side of how China is pursuing a very different strategy rather than chasing AGI and kind of betting all of its tokens there. The Chinese government is steering the tech industry there more towards practical and affordable AI tools that are immediately boosting efficiency in places like agriculture, medicine, manufacturing, these everyday industries that are the backbone of society. And leaning in more towards integration and application, where they're using these AI tools to assist from things like medical diagnosis to weather forecasts, to industrial automation, and even things like crop management. And the state is pouring a lot of money into this. This is very different, obviously, than what the US is doing, where, AGI is the main thing that's on everyone's mind. China is taking a slightly different approach. And a lot of analysts are kind of viewing this as China being a fast follower or an implementer in this race, trying to kind of minimize risk and cost potentially, where the U.S. is, trying to maintain more of the innovation and technological advances in this area. So it's something that, is obviously on everyone's mind with this whole U.S. versus China thing, not only in things like tariffs, which are obviously playing a role into this, but from a big picture point of view, this whole global AI race and how it's shifting. There's a lot of skepticism, of course, around AGI, and to see China taking a more practical and state-driven approach is something new and something we'll have to keep tracking. But it's a great piece, and I thought it was just kind of another relevant thing that we've been discussing recently.
I think it's spot on, and it's a topic that I wrote a piece on this week as well, which is the Xi Jinping and the Chinese companies are focusing on the applications layer much more than debating AG timing to AGI and all the stuff that we are doing, navel gazing around with our founders and so on that are focusing on. Are we there yet? AGI? Are we there yet? Super intelligence? All these macro things. China's less concerned about that. They're just in the meat and potatoes, just getting the damn things working and reasonably out there, etc. Focusing on open source. Majority of after DeepSeek, 160, 70 days ago, the entire AI industry in China has shifted to open source, which I think is a good thing for the innovation and the application layer. The application layer, for those familiar with some of the stuff we do on reset to zero, it's the holy grail box number 6. It's the box where everyone wants to be, because that's where the high margins are once the technology wave matures. And so China is focused on that, and the government, the Xi Jinping, is saying, guys, we will continue to support top-down infrastructure, because there's a huge infrastructure race over there, infrastructure race over there, over here, and everyone talks about the AI race between the two countries, and I don't think it should be thought of as a race, because this is multiple decades and this is an infinite game, infinite race. People are familiar with that concept. But the one thing the state can do is encourage the building of power. Power is a critical ingredient into AI. So as a result, China is, as a government, is basically far ahead of the US in terms of raising on power, whether it's renewables, solar, wind, nuclear, just everything. They've got roadmap and implementation of multi-gigawatts of power you're going to need for all these data centers. Whereas the US is, the administration is supporting the AI industry to do that, but they're also tying one hand behind their back by not supporting renewables, solar, wind. Those are being cut off at the knees. And that is a bad thing, not just for AI data centers, but for the power building to take the pressure off the power that's required for the data center side. And as a result, we are shooting ourselves into the foot on the power side. And so China's doing two things. One is focusing on the power side from a top-down government point of view, and at the same time letting their companies focus on the application side, which is what you're talking about, which ties into my read of the week. There's a new book out, I just finished it, called Breakneck by Dan Wang. He's a Chinese American. He's lived in China, lived in the US, Silicon Valley, knows both worlds. He's written this great book. And his key theme is that the Chinese over the last 15, 20 years, top down, if you look at, all the 9 members of the Politburo, their backgrounds, they're all engineers. Whereas if you look at our leadership on the government side, most of them are lawyers. And so that shows in the way the tone of the countries are in terms of how, especially in an era where so much has to be built at the beginning of this 21st century, 25 years in. Just like the US built an extraordinary country infrastructure from 1900s to 1960s in terms of national highways and so on. China in 10, 15, 20 years has built extraordinary infrastructure, more high-speed rail than the rest of the world combined, more roads, more dams, more power, everything. That is also, it gives a lot of detail on how that is effectuated, not just in terms of the federal government in China, but also bottom up, how it's run through the provinces and so on. So extraordinary amount of good detail to understand all this stuff. And the one thing I would just say, the one sad thing that's happened with the US-China tussle is that most people in Washington, they used to, and our leaders used to go, our business leaders used to go to China regularly. Today, it's if you go to China, you're a panda lover. And that is a bad thing. We need to understand each other, even if we're competing with them. And this book is a good way to kind of get a glimpse on that. So for those of you who are just want a little bit more detail, the real stuff that's going on, these guys, the Chinese, are not just copying us. They're not just using cheap labor. They're way ahead on so many things, autos, all the stuff that physical AI is going to need. It's really in China. And we are at a disadvantage if we don't at least acknowledge these differences and their advantages. And so I would highlight this book as one of the new things to kind of bone up on this. And that brings us to our obsession of the week, Neil.
Yeah.
And you have a good one here.
Yeah, mine is a Verge article. It's something near and dear to my heart, just coming from an undergraduate degree of computer engineering. And, most of my friends, taking on software roles out of college. It's a Verge article titled, "Is AI the End of Software Engineering or the Next Step in Its Evolution?" Obviously a lot of people have a very doomerous mindset on this where, AI has come in and is potentially going to cut jobs in software engineering because a lot of these generative tools like ChatGPT and whatnot are kind of transforming the process of how we write code. Obviously, vibe coding, a term that's been coined in the last couple of months and has kind of blown up ever since. Everyone kind of using that to describe their workflows now with things like Cursor and whatnot, where people without much formal coding experience can leverage a lot of these AI assistants to quickly generate software solutions, big and small. But I think where the piece is really interesting and why I would encourage everyone to read it is because it shows a lot of the parallels between things like vibe coding and earlier processes such as no code platforms, which have existed for a while, where people, again, with no formal experience kind of go in and still generate pieces of software, but also things like shotgun debugging, which a lot of viewers may not be familiar with, but it's a process in which programmers would sometimes make, random, sometimes mindless changes in code in search of solutions or innovations in certain areas. Is something I've had to do in my undergrad just because, again, I started before ChatGPT existed and I kind of came in towards the end of my degree. So it's practices I've had to use. But ultimately, the piece raises the question of whether AI is kind of marking the end of what traditional software engineering looks like, or if this is simply just another evolutionary step where coding is made more accessible, but it also introduces new types of challenges and responsibilities for future engineers.
I love it. Prime topic and very key. And it kind of relates to my obsession of the week as well, which is, we've talked a lot on the show that, AI, machine learning, et cetera, over the last 20, 30 years, almost every major company, DeepMind from Google, OpenAI, et cetera, its roots when they were first doing the basic research around large language models, et cetera, were inspired by games. And one of the, and everyone knows, 20 years ago, IBM's computers, beat Kasparov, world champion on chess, and they did it through machine learning architectures and the computers of the time. And then, just draw a straight line. DeepMind at Google in 2016 beat the world champion for Go, which is vastly more complicated than chess in terms of the number of combinatorial moves. The possible moves are bigger than the atoms in the universe, etc. And as a quantum physics freak, that's my other passion beyond AI, as you know. It's a crazy area. But at the same time, AlphaGo, there's a documentary which I had watched a few years ago. I went back and rewatched it. It's on Netflix, etc. Again, I would recommend people do watch this, etc. And Demis Hassabis who is the founder of DeepMind, is front and center along with his team. They had been working 20 years to build up their capabilities to get to this point in 2016, where their version of AlphaGo, which is their software to play Go, beat the then world champion Lee Sedol of South Korea. And South Korea, most people don't know, a country of over 50, 60 million people, they're nuts. They're as nuts about Go as we are about football and basketball. And the whole country was riveted. The movie is just incredible. You had Sergey there, Eric Schmidt, all the founders of Google. It was just very nicely done. But here's why I'm bringing it up as an obsession for me, because 2016 was when AI of that type, and it was very different, but that was very different AI, by the way. It was not LLM. It was not transformer from a technology point of view. Transformers were not invented until 2017, the next year, by the Google paper, Attention is All You Need. You know, the 8 founders are now all billionaires and doing all kinds of crazy things today. So the transformer architecture was not even implemented in AlphaGo to do this. And if you watch the movie, and I'm not going to break any spoilers, watch it. There's no spoilers here. But you would watch that, and at the end of it, you're like, oh my God, these AI is going to take over the world. And what's extraordinary is that if you then go back and what's happened to AlphaGo since 2016, Google has dropped attention, no pun intended, on AlphaGo. AlphaGo is now open source. It's gone on to become it was AlphaGo Master and AlphaGo Zero. Those things are open source. You and I the thing is called Catago. We can download it. It's open source, and it's better than the thing that beat Lee Sedol, 10 years ago. And what's extraordinary is what the whole world was riveted, and, this AI is going to beat us, Terminator, Skynet. No one pays attention to it. It's gone in 10, 11 years. Why?
Yeah.
Beating the human player, the top human player in games, was the beginning of 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 the task for machine learning and AI. And that was the key lesson that I took away watching this thing again today in 2025. Because right now you look at generative AI and GPT-5, everyone's fixated on, oh my God, this is going to take over the world. We're going to replace software engineers. We're going to replace PhDs. We're going to replace doctors. We're going to replace lawyers. No, we're not. Not for a very long time. And I will talk about it in future shows and so on. His approaches, as amazing they are, they're as amazing as AlphaGo was in 2013, 14, 15, all the way to 16 when they beat Lee Sedol, but it's not anywhere close, even through the scaling exponentials. There's a lot of technical reasons for this. We can go through this in a different show. But the reason this is an obsession of mine, and the reason this movie, and I wanted to talk about it and introduce it to people, and we still have a Labor Day weekend holiday left. Please watch this and think about these issues as you puzzle over this issue of AI taking over the world and all this hoopla, which is way ahead of reality. Just like AlphaGo, it was amazing to watch this human accomplishment of this 30, 40-person team that created AlphaGo to beat this human champion. But it was a great technical accomplishment, but it was not the end of the goals at the beginning of the beginning. And I wanted to highlight that. So that's my obsession of
it's
the
great.
week.
It's something that we're assigned. It's really good. I even was able to kind of get my parents to sit down and watch it, just because, other than it being this super technical thing, they framed it in a good way where in the end it shows the power of technology and evolution over time, and how these things are kind of transforming everyday things, whether it's games in this case, or, obviously, as we've discussed, every aspect of any industry.
And it's available free on YouTube. We'll put the link up, and it's on
Yeah.
Netflix, where there's a more produced version. So please
Yeah.
take a look. So with that, I think we can end up, but we have our burning questions of the week.
Yeah.
So my burning questions to Neal, you're out there, you're close to making some decisions on jobs and so on, big companies, small companies, and so on. And obviously this AI thing is sweeping everybody, etc.
Yeah.
Just love your thoughts on, as you've gone through close up, small company opportunities, big company opportunities, your peers, Gen Z, etc. What are some takeaways as you go into the fall and, getting ready to make some decisions here?
Yeah, it's something that I've been discussing with a couple of friends, even that I was with in Connecticut for the past week. Everyone's kind of in the same recruitment grind right now, talking to big companies, small companies, and obviously there's pros and cons in both. But I think where I stand right now, after having talked to a lot of the bigger companies and having talked to some of the smaller companies, is that for this stage in my career where I'm just starting out of college and me wanting to go into this area of product and, this intersection of design and engineering and business, I think smaller companies provide something that maybe you may not find in a lot of the bigger companies where the rate of innovation, obviously the amount of responsibility that you're given is a lot higher. Whereas with a bigger company, things are a lot more siloed. It takes time to approve things. Things might move at a slower rate. And in the end, what you ship may not impact as many users as you want for reasons that are valid. Obviously, with a lot of these changes, it impacts millions, if not billions, of people. And there's a lot of care and thought that needs to be put into that. But I think at this point in my career where I want to learn as much as possible and gain these experiences fast, I think a smaller company does offer a lot of nuance that isn't found in other places. And it's something that, I've discussed with a couple of friends of mine, and they've kind of also shifted their perspective on that, where earlier maybe they were targeting a lot of companies in big tech, but now they're potentially exploring the startup route, or at least the early growth stage route of a company, just because of the autonomy it provides from a role point of view. I think it's super exciting.
Awesome. And again, I'm glad you're being so thoughtful and deliberate on this.
Yeah.
And for those watching here, if anyone, Neil, my nephew, Neil Makwana, I'm very proud of him. He's going to be snapped up by one of these companies very quickly. So if you guys have something interesting to do, ping him. You can contact him through the stuff, but it's getting close,
Yeah.
guys. Neil Makwana
Yeah.
is going to be gone pretty soon. So that was my
Yeah.
burning question for you. So why don't you
Yeah,
toss me yours and I will.
mine was a slightly one out of left field, but I know it's something that you've also spent time thinking about. It's kind of how do you see AI affecting this kind of ad tech world that we're living in? Obviously, from the perspective of how ads are served up with generative AI search, but also from a perspective of marketing, where a lot of content now is AI generated, and people are obviously hyper aware of that now with this rise of generative content in the last few years, and there's a lot of public perception on what they're being shown on places like social media and even on websites, but whether it's authentically generated by people or if it's AI generated content. Just how do you kind of see that evolving and where we stand right now?
Great question. Again, we've talked about it on the show in terms of the internet being broken by search engine optimization is now giving way to AI search. So far fewer blue links for the Googles of the world. What does that do to the macro economy? It's one of the biggest, most profitable businesses on the planet that we've seen that, the Googles and the Metas have been big, and Amazon now big beneficiaries, even Apple. And, we've been saying, hey, it'll get rebuilt and it'll be bigger over time. It's just that there are typically, ebbs and flows, my favorite phrase. And, I had a piece up that talked about we're going to go from SEO, search engine optimization, to GEO, generative engine optimization over time. And so ad is a big piece. And the big company to watch on this that is typically front and center on this is Mark Zuckerberg with Meta. He's laser focused on this. I'll never forget a year ago when the whole TikTok debate was going on. TikTok basically invented short video. I think it was 2024. Meta made more revenues through applying its ad technologies, AI generated ad technologies to Reels, which is their version of the TikTok videos. They made $10 billion in revenue they beat TikTok. They beat ByteDance to it because of the ad focus. And obviously, Googles of the world are also focused on this. So, yeah, this is a big transition thing, huge opportunity set. Companies, there'll be dozens of unicorns, if not more, globally around this. And there'll be value destruction as well in terms of the existing ways to do search engine optimization and how today's websites are monetized, et cetera. That'll change. So exciting area, glass half full, but
Yeah.
key topic. So thank you for that question. And I want to thank you all for joining us for episode 19 on a Labor Day week. Please enjoy the rest of your Labor Day holiday. And we're going to be back episode 20 next week. There's so much more to talk about. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned as always.
Sounds good.
Send us feedback and thoughts. I always appreciate it.
See you guys next week.